All right, I'm back.
Welcome back. We're ready to go here.
All right, excellent. Give me a moment to get my own recording set up. All right. I've started the recording on my end. You can start recording at any time you like. Let me know when you've begun.
I've begun.
All right. We might wind up cutting out the first couple of minutes because getting started is always the hardest part for me when I do these recordings of any kind.
I understand. If we want to make have an idea of how we're going to do this, you can really just read the body of text if you like, unless you want to be
Um,
super complete.
that'll be the easy part. I figure I should probably tack on an introduction to this. So let me actually try this now. Hello. These are the minutes of the 12th Council of See what I mean? Hello. These are Hello. These are the minutes of the 12th Council of Stellar Management, the second summit, conducted from January the 15th to January the 18th, 2018 in Reykjavik, Iceland. These minutes are read by All right, that was awkward. Let me try that again. These are the minutes of the 12th Council of Stellar Management, the second summit, conducted in Reykjavik, Iceland, from January the 15th to January the 18th, 2018, as read by Seamus Donoghue of Eve University. The Monday session, Summit Welcome, and Quarter 1, Quarter 2 Overview. Attendees, CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Hellbunny, CCP Orca, CCP Manbjorn. CCP Guard officially welcomes everyone to the first session of the summit. He explains that CCP Seagull is on maternity leave and CCP Hellbunny will step in to talk about future plans for EVE Online, specifically the spring expansion. CCP Hellbunny explains that the teams will go into details about each feature on the roadmap, but this is a mix of fixing existing features as well as introducing new things to the game. He also explains that the plan is not set in stone and will be adaptive based on feedback externally and internally. He then goes on to mention that this Thursday, the next 6 months after this roadmap, will be going into the early planning phase. Sort brings up jump fatigue not being in the roadmap. CCP Hellbunny responds saying that we have it on our list and it is being considered, admitting that this is a bad system which has room for improvement. Sort follows up asking what CCP would consider a successful 6 months. CCP Hellbunny states simply that an increase in DAU would be a sign of success and a priority for CCP. In addition to this, monitoring the activity for features is going to be considered to determine whether CCP should invest in particular features based on how popular they are. Refresh my memory. What's a DAU?
That's actually a gaming term for
I'm
active.
guessing it's daily average
Yeah, that's
users.
exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I thought it was, but I didn't. Sort asks if this daily average user increase is focusing on new players. CCP Hellbunny says it's a balance of new and old players with features which would increase the DAU from both outlets. Sort asks if anything were to change, whether the roadmap would drop features for new players or the old ones. CCP Hellbunny says that there are multiple teams in place and this would be a non-issue in that regard. Aerith asks about the acquisition attempts being made. CCP Orca says that this would be addressed in more detail in another session, specifically about this topic. CCP Hellbunny mentions that CCP would want to see what corporations which recruit a lot are doing correctly and how CCP could emulate that. This boils down to a help me help you scenario, which would be beneficial for both players and CCP. CCP Hellbunny heads out and CCP Manborn steps in. Okay, hold on. I keep. You know what? This is going to sound confusing in audio
Mhm.
because we're using CCP both to refer to the company and to specific employees. I'm going to go
Mhm.
back and start over with this first session. I think the introduction is okay. We can keep the introduction, but I'm going to go back and start this section over. And the convention I'm going to use is when referring to an employee, I'll say CCP. If I'm referring to the company, I'll say Crowd Control Productions.
Terrific.
Monday session, Summit Welcome, and Quarter 1, Quarter 2 Overview. Attendees, CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Hellbunny, CCP Orca, CCP Manbjorn. CCP Guard officially welcomes everyone to the first session of the summit. He explains that CCP Seagull is on maternity leave and CCP Hellbunny will step in to talk about future plans for EVE Online, specifically the spring expansion. CCP Hellbunny explains that the teams will go into details about each feature on the roadmap, but this is a mix of fixing existing features as well as introducing new things to the game. He also explains that the plan is not set in stone and will be adaptive based on feedback externally and internally. He then goes on to mention that this Thursday, the next 6 months after this roadmap, will be going into the early planning phase. Sort brings up jump fatigue not being in the roadmap. CCP Hellbunny responds saying that we have it on our list and it is being considered, admitting that this is a bad system which has room for improvement. Sort follows up asking what Crowd Control Productions would consider a successful 6 months. CCP Hellbunny states simply that an increase in daily average users would be a sign of success and a priority for Crowd Control Productions. In addition to this, monitoring the activity for features is going to be considered to determine whether Crowd Control Productions should invest in particular features based on how popular they are. Sort asks if this DAU increase is focusing on new players. CCP Hellbunny says it's a balance of new and old players with features which would increase the DAU from both outlets. Sort asks if anything were to change, whether the roadmap would drop features for new players or the old ones. CCP Hellbunny says that there are multiple teams in place, and this would be a non-issue in that regard. Aerith asks about the acquisition attempts being made. CCP Orca says that this would be addressed in more detail in another session, specifically about this topic. CCP Hellbunny mentions that Crowd Control Productions would want to see what corporations which recruit a lot are doing right and how Crowd Control Productions could emulate that. This boils down to a help me help you scenario, which would be beneficial for both players and Crowd Control Productions. CCP Hellbunny heads out and CCP Manbjorn steps in. Judge brings up the lack of ship balancing in the roadmap. CCP Guard points that the roadmap they were shown is not set in stone and could change. Sort refers back to his question about what gets chopped out of the roadmap. The Council of Stellar Management agrees that ship balancing is being talked about a lot from CCP, but a lack of visible action. CCP Manbjorn clarifies on how the roadmap works and why it appears that ship balancing was removed from the roadmap, whereas that was not the case. Crossed out bits didn't always mean something was axed, but sometimes that it wasn't finished in time and production would continue in the next sprint. In addition to that, CCP Orca says that the team is still working on it actively. Sort says that there should be faster response from crowd control productions and more frequent balancing changes being made. He specifically mentions the Macarials, which are extremely powerful now in the game. Suetonia points out this could be a communications issue, and more developer presence on the forums regarding balancing could help. Sort brings up an example of jump fatigue and crowd control productions saying they would turn the dials and adjust it as needed for 6 months after release. He says that small incremental changes across the game would be greatly appreciated rather than a big balancing release. CCP Manbjorn gets what Sword is saying and says that Crowd Control Productions needs to treat balancing with respect. Sort boils this down to a larger issue that things are released in the game and then not followed up on. He feels that for the next 6 months, Crowd Control Productions should focus on fixing and adjusting existing features in the game before focusing on something new. CCP Orca asks what the Council of Stellar Management thinks about removing features from the game which are not working. This results in a mixed response. Sort mentions that Crowd Control Productions should prioritize which part of the player base the content is being developed for. He then mentions the Entosis system being boring and that interceptors are a problem, referring to when this was initially pitched that the Council of Stellar Management said interceptors would be a problem. Hold on, I'm going to re-record that last paragraph. Sort mentions that Crowd Control Productions should prioritize which part of the player base the content is being developed for. He then mentions the Entosis system being boring and that interceptors are a problem, referring to when this was initially pitched that the Council of Stellar Management said interceptors would be a problem. CCP Guard mentions that there are two sides to the coin. There are still a lot of players in the game who just do their own thing and are not necessarily associated with big groups or the political climate. Aerith and CCP Falcon bounce off each other that there should be different mechanics for upwell structures depending on the system security rather than a one-size-fits-all system. Sort discusses some specifics for the upwell structure mechanics in regard to balancing, such as linking it to sovereignty mechanics, finding mechanics to link structures to in low security and high security, which fit their respective systems. Sort says that Crowd Control Productions has, in the past, cut products which weren't working, and asks why this mentality is not used for features. CCP Guard clarifies that there is some thinking of this kind going on internally. Aerith and Sort clarify to CCP Manbjorn that small gang fights do not scale well and are too effective in larger scale fights. The consensus is that there are too many risk-adverse mechanics in the game, with nullification, logistics, and so on. The emphasis on green killboards is also too high. Avoiding fights for defenders is way too easy right now, and there is no incentive to go out and fight, as the defender gets to also pick when the engagement would take place. Aerith mentions the Blood Raider Shipyards feature, which he questions how many players have run it. CCP Manbjorn clarifies this was a compartmentalized way to test the new non-player character artificial intelligence. The message that Aerith and Sword are getting across is that Crowd Control Productions needs to address existing features to retain and increase the player base rather than focusing on Jesus features, which are then deployed and not touched on again. Sort wants to see more of the promised iteration on features which are released. The Council of Stellar Management wants to see Crowd Control Productions listening to them more, referring to earlier summits and changes such as Sovereignty and Citadels, which they predicted correctly the negative effects of, and problems which they feel exist in the game now. CCP Manbjorn wants to know where the problem specifically lies within communication. CCP Orca mentions jump fatigue and talks about an effort that is underway to look at data and measure the effects of the current mechanic on the game. Sort says this is something he has heard often before and not seen any progress being made. This repeated cycle of not addressing the feature, despite saying it is being looked into, has a negative impact on the credibility Crowd Control Productions has. The Council of Stellar Management sees a feature on the roadmap, which they refer to a Jesus feature based on the time it takes and teams involved. CCP Manbjorn points out that the Citadel and Sovereignty blocks on the roadmap have bigger teams working on them, again explaining that equal sized blocks on the roadmap don't necessarily represent equal effort. CCP Manbjorn also says that since release, the Citadels have been under constant iteration, with numerous people working on said feature. Sort and Aerith emphasize that Crowd Control Productions should not be afraid to tell them about any issues or the whole picture for the discussion at hand. The Council of Stellar Management feels that if a feature is not getting iteration or attention in the foreseeable future, that should be communicated. End of session. All right, shall I move on to the next one? Monday session. The agency, user interface, and user experience. Attendees: CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Shreddy, CCP Mr. Happy, CCP Dragon, CCP Shark, CCP Manbjorn, CCP Sledgehammer, CCP Optimal. CCP Dragon starts by asking the Council of Stellar Management a question regarding the agency, specifically what is working and what isn't. He gives a brief overview of what the goal for the agency is, which could be summarized to finding. He gives a brief overview. Sorry, my phone made a noise. CCP Dragon starts by asking the Council of Stellar Management a question regarding the agency, specifically what is working and what isn't. He gives a brief overview of what the goal for the agency is, which could be summarized to find things to do in the game. CCP Mr. Happy clarifies that this is an ongoing project with constant iteration, and that there are some content pieces missing from the agency which are being ported over. Any feedback would be actively taken into consideration for development. CCP Dragon says that CCP Shreddy will essentially be a live ops guy for the agency, with constant activity and adaptability. Aerith asks if allowing player corporations to have some features in the agency. Alright, this is not a complete sentence. Alright, I'm gonna take it from the top of the second paragraph and just read it as is. I might have to put a disclaimer, insert a disclaimer earlier into the recording about the minutes are being read as is with no correction for grammar. CCP Dragon says that CCP Shreddy will essentially be a live ops guy for the agency with constant activity and adaptability. Aerith asks if allowing player corporations to have some features in the agency. Period. Dragon explains that this is a long-term goal, that player corporations would have access to templates they could use for their members. The mission would be picked up by the corporation, however, the rewards would also be supplied by the corporation. This is the future vision, and the exact mechanics are naturally being ironed out. This is more about the live event system rather than the agency. CCP Dragon goes on to say that the agency is more focused on what gameplay is available to the player in their neighboring systems, to bring to the surface the various activities which may not necessarily be easily found. CCP Claymore answers a question Jin had, that there are now in-game chat channels for the various activities, much like the incursion chat channels. Steve points out with the agent finder in the agency is very limited compared to the old one, such as it being capped at 12 agents, and no way to filter out system security. Yukiko clarifies this would be for min-maxing. CCP Claymore suggests a better filter to find agents next to market hubs, and so on. CCP Dragon suggests a search method of finding content next to systems other than the one the player is in. Steve wants to see hotspots for ganking to avoid that area in the agency when looking for content, alternatively, seeing market activity, and so on. Claymore clarifies that this is a technical issue as the agency map is not the map. CCP Dragon chimes in saying that the map and the agency are two drastically different mechanics in the game, which are used in very different circumstances. Right now, the cons outweigh the pros of merging them for the sake of having the specific map filters in the agency. Innominate says that a way for experienced players to use the agency to find the optimal agents to run missions for, as an example. CCP Dragon goes back to the suggested tab. It is adaptive but capped at 12 suggestions to not overwhelm new players. New players would at most experience 6 of those in the start. The suggested tab also takes player experience into consideration, hiding content from new players which would need more experience. This is, however, still being tweaked, and the team is open to suggestions. Some were suggested, such as an option in the escape menu or quitting the tutorial. These hidden options in the agency only affect the suggested tab, though. All content can be found if the player adjusts the filters and goes digging. CCP Mr. Happy says that the suggested tab is the most heavily used tab. Sort asks if using the ESI in some way with the agency is feasible, highlighting certain agents or asteroid belts for new players. CCP Dragon clarifies that the agency is really designed to be a window into existing features in the game. Sort asks whether exporting lists from the agency would be feasible to provide a list of preferred agents as an example. All right, hold on. I'm using for my Discord push to talk a button on my mouse. I need to rebind this to a button on my keyboard. Give me a moment.
All right, guys, if you're just joining us,
All right,
we're
that should
reading
work
minutes
better.
with Seamus Donahue from Eve University. We're going through all the minutes, reading all of it.
Innominate asks if salvaging is a part of the agency, as this is a good way of making ISK for new players. Sort suggests that completed mission sites with salvage left behind could become available in the agency for other players to access. CCP Dragon says this is in line with the future vision of the agency. Steve points out this shouldn't be an automatic system, rather, an option is prevented to the mission runner to donate the salvage to the agency. Oh, they mean presented. Yeah, it looks like these minutes were a little bit rushed. I'm wondering if we should stop recording for today, and what I might need to do is copy and paste these into a new text document and start correcting errors.
So you want to correct their work, and so it's more readable?
Yeah, uh, because earlier we had that incomplete sentence, and now
Mhm.
we've got a completely wrong word. Rather, an option is prevented to the mission runner to donate the salvage to the agency.
Yeah, if you want to be that exact, I'll support you in that for sure. I also will say if you want to take less work on your shoulders about it, we could just go with the errors that they put in the minutes. However you want to proceed is fine with me. But we can stop. I can furnish you with a Word document. We can run it through some grammar programs.
Yeah. I um okay, let's continue with the recording as is, mistakes and all. We'll insert a disclaimer at the top and we'll get feedback on this first pass.
Yeah, I mean,
I'll correct the error this time around, but when I retake this paragraph, but I'll just take all errors as is when I read the rest of it.
yeah. However you want to proceed, either way. I respect your exactness.
All right.
Let's take it. Tell me where to
Read
take it from.
the top of the page. Innominate asks if.
Okay.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Innominate asks if salvaging is a part of the agency, as this is a good way of making ISK for new players. Sort suggests that completed mission sites with salvage left behind could become available in the agency for other players to access. CCP Dragon says this is in line with the future vision of the agency. Steve points out that this shouldn't be an automatic system, rather than an option is presented to the mission runner to donate the salvage to the agency. Yukiko and Steve bring up the suggestion of manufacturing being added to the agency. CCP Optimal points out that manufacturing for new players is always run on a loss. Steve asks about adding the loyalty point store to the agency. CCP Optimal points out that Crowd Control Productions wants to revamp the store on a whole. Sort asks about the agency and plugging in implants. CCP Dragon clarifies that this is something related to the event specifically and would be discussed in another session. CCP Optimal saw that after the Sisters of Eve arc was added to the agency, he saw a fourfold increase in the arc being run. The Council of Stellar Management points out that this may be a seasonal thing with players running them again. They will consider normalizing the statistic with that in mind. Sort asks about factional warfare being added to the agency and what potential there is in the agency in that regard. CCP Optimal clarifies that the only change made in the agency was user interface being transferred into the agency rather than adding any functionality. Steve points out that the potential for factional warfare becoming one-sided is quite great, as players may only join a winning side. The Council of Stellar Management points out that the factional warfare system currently throws players into the deep end. CCP Optimal clarifies that the agency does not actively suggest anything, the system just automatically shows available content in the area, such as locations to apply to factional warfare. Sort suggests a graduation program of some sorts which could be implemented into the agency system. This is something the team has been considering, such as actively pushing the new players into corporations. Claymore says that advertising for specific corporations would not be feasible. However, the option to show filtered recruitment ads for corporations which have marked activities which interest the player would be an option. Another alternative suggested by the Council of Stellar Management would be a mentoring system of some kind, which would allow members of corporations to take new players under their wing and take them along to various activities. This also ties into the group finder, which has been investigated as a feature by Crowd Control Productions. Sort asks if any statistics on the usage of the agency would be possibly released in a dev blog. CCP Dragon says this is certainly a possibility. End of session. Give me a moment, I need to drink something. No, it's fine. It's just that I have other obligations to tend to in about an hour. We're not going to get through the whole thing today. Okay, are you ready? Monday session. player experience team and team security, security, banning, and customer service. Attendees: CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Cemetery, CCP Grimmy, CCP Stardust, CCP Pelagro. CCP Cemetery starts with an introduction of the people present before starting to talk about account recovery. CCP Stardust steps in to explain that in most cases, to recover an account in any capacity requires talking to a game master. This is a very cumbersome process, as well as being the biggest ticket load PX gets, player experience, formerly customer support. This could be improved. The internal tools team are designing a system which does this account recovery for the player. CCP Cemetery chips in saying that this is one of the first steps for self-service. He then proceeds to demonstrate the work-in-progress tool. Steve asks if account recovery through Facebook would be possible. CCP Cemetery clarifies that Crowd Control Productions does not associate link existing account with third parties or social media platforms unless they were created via Steam, etc. The new tool will be able to locate accounts for the player automatically if sufficient information was provided, even if the player does not remember their username. Sort suggests adding a country of registration as an option in the questions list for verification purposes. Pelagro says this is information which can help Crowd Control Productions identify the lost account and already exists in the system, although worded a bit differently. CCP Cemetery clarifies that this relies on the registered email address and no information would be provided through the web. CCP Stardust and CCP Cemetery both understand that contacting support with the addition of waiting times is very discouraging and that Crowd Control Productions loses potentially returning players because of this. There is a caveat, though, because this service needs to be fast but also secure, as the value of the accounts is incredibly high. They finished demonstrating the work in progress tool. Pelagro suggests giving some background on the state of account security in 2017. This is brought up due to the huge trend in accounts being compromised. Most real money trading occurring now is from stolen accounts. The more common cause is the email address being compromised rather than the account, as the credentials being used are valid. The value of accounts has increased due to skill points becoming a commodity, in addition to interstellar credits and assets. Due to the accounts being accessed, quote, legitimately, unquote, with correct credentials due to the email address being compromised, it is difficult to defend against. Purchased ISK is now coming in from these accessed accounts rather than bot farms. Not to say that botting isn't still a thing. Prior to Ascension, it was difficult to access accounts as they were inactive. Now all accounts are active, and the owners may not realize their account was compromised until months later. The cleanup process is also by far the most time-consuming part in these cases. Pelagro also mentions that accounts which have corporate hangar access should be made extra secure, as these are the wildcards in accounts being compromised, with the potential for even more damage being caused to the economy. Despite email verification being enabled for every account during the Ascension expansion, the amount of accounts being accessed has increased due to the compromised email accounts. The ideal solution suggested by Crowd Control Productions would be to introduce a more complex authentication process. However, this is a complicated process which is not easy to implement on the player base. A middle ground would be to incentivize players to enable two-factor authentication on their accounts to combat this. CCP Cemetery points out that we would want to find the best security with the least friction possible. The Council of Stellar Management has a general agreement that chief executive officers and directors should have increased account security measures. This would need to be policed by the players themselves, however. Sort asks about a warning threshold for accounts being extracted of their skill points. CCP Cemetery points out that crowd control productions could have warning thresholds in place, and that they do, but the hackers find the magic number to bypass it or prevent the trigger from occurring. CCP Guard asks if two-factor authentication being mandatory for the ability to extract skill points would be a large inconvenience for players. Aerith says that if a new device is used to log into an account, then verification should be mandatory. The Council of Stellar Management feels the country-based verification prompt is not enough. CCP Cemetery says this is something which is being considered. CCP Cemetery explains that the reason this is not being addressed right now is simply because there are many stakeholders which need to give their opinion on this, and the potential impact needs to be measured before any development can be started. In addition to this, CCP needs to know who would be the user of two-factor authentication in the player base. Aerith points out that although crowd control productions may not be able to enforce it, the corporate leaders can. Innominate asks about the ability to change usernames. CCP Pellegro would love to see that. This then asked about master accounts. Everyone agreed that this would be amazing. An incentive could be to make two-factor authentication mandatory for master accounts. Pellegro says that Crowd Control Productions does not want to put arbitrary restrictions on the EVE experience to prevent real money trade. Sort wants to address the elephant in the room: bots. There is no information which Crowd Control Productions can disclose today. Sort asks about the dev blog which was promised. Sort believes this needs to be addressed in some capacity for the sake of appeasing the community. Pellegro chimes in saying the situation is unacceptable and he wants to see something more done about it, directly quoting the article which has been a hot topic recently. Rest assured, it's something which Pellegro wants to see action on. CCP Falcon steps in saying that the dev blog was delayed by him as it did not specifically address the botting, only account hacking, which is also a problem, but not the one players were asking questions about and necessarily want to hear about at this time. Judge points out that it may not be necessary to see action, however, more importantly wants to see more communication from team security. Judge has a three-part question. Which country accounts are being hacked? Which country buys the most? Which country sells the most? Pellegro says that there is no specific country being hacked, but real money trade buyers are mostly in the Western countries. Sort points out that the report a bot feature should be brought to the attention of the players. CCP Cemetery points out that this is a question of prioritization, addressing the hacking problem before moving on to the next big thing, which would be botting. The Council of Stellar Management points out that this is also a question of visibility. Players perceive botting to be a bigger issue because they are visible in the game, whereas normal players wouldn't notice any of the accounts being hacked. This goes back to the lack of communication from Crowd Control Productions about the matter, and the perception that Crowd Control Productions is not doing anything about it. A bot ganking stream was suggested by CCP Guard, much like Jagex do in RuneScape. The Council of Stellar Management practically cheered. End of session. Monday session, player versus environment. Hold on. Is this really a Monday session? Let me double check.
You're turning into a live reading of the minutes. We're going through all of them. We'll do half today and half another day. We'll cut it up and put it out in a podcast for people who are driving around and have time to actually read 77 pages of the Council of Stellar Management minutes.
All right. I'm going to stop mentioning which day of the week each session was done on because it's not listed in the actual session header. So if I keep going on in that pattern, I'm going to make a mistake there. Session, player versus environment. Attendees, CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Burger, CCP Paradox, CCP Larrikin, CCP Tom B. CCP Larrikin explained that this session would be about the mining operations, shipyards, and forward operating bases. The team is mostly looking for feedback on the existing mechanics. CCP Burger talks about the forward operating base deployment having some hiccups and considering the development process being a bit, quote, dynamic, unquote. The team has avoided blanket changes, but rather tried to do small tweaks. Innominate asks if there is a maximum duration before they despawn. There is. Larrikin will not disclose that time. Larrikin would like feedback on communicating about the features in a narrative style rather than via a dev blog. Sort says there is some confusion on the loot mechanics and what loot is guaranteed. Larrikin says they want to release a dev blog to talk about it at a later date. Larrikin and the Council of Stellar Management agree that the thematic mechanic explanation is nice, but more concrete information should be released. Sort asks about deploying a citadel on the Sotio site, and this is something Larrikin wants to fix. Team Phenomenon explains that they make tools for other teams to use, as well as deploying features in the game. Even though the feature itself may not have hit the mark, the tools which were developed in the process add value to other mechanics and are the main priority for the team. The Council of Stellar Management want this to be communicated to the player base. The Council of Stellar Management ask about the manufacturing costs of existing Serpentis capitals. Larrikin clarifies this was never something they planned to change or adjust due to the proliferation of blueprint copies. Crowd Control Productions considered dropping a new Serpentis carrier and new blueprint copies with lower construction requirements rather than changing the existing blueprint copies. Larrikin mentions the changes made to NPC standings, specifically the patrol forces attacking players despite appearing blue. The colors will now represent the NPC reactions accordingly. Larrikin asks for any other feedback on the forward operating bases. Suetonia suggests that if no one has found the forward operating bases, then they would appear in the agency. Sort says the issue with asteroid belts being empty, but the miners being present, and the time needed to wait for the belts to respawn, but the potential of that happening and the miners no longer being there. This causes frustration. Suetonia suggests an escalating hint system. Larrikin says it exists already, but making the hints a bit more obvious is something they could consider. Steve asks about the changes to the reinforcement timers and how the artificial intelligence will react to it. Larrikin says he is fine with artificial intelligence attacking the anchoring structures, and asks the Council of Stellar Management if they are opposed to it. The Council of Stellar Management does not have objections. Larrikin asks about feedback regarding the roaming NPCs in high security. The Council of Stellar Management hasn't heard any feedback in that regard. Suetonia suggests the feature becoming more visible in the agency to raise awareness. Berger talks about a massive NPC fight between the NPC miners and patrolling NPCs from another faction, with drifters being involved, and no player saw it. Sort suggests forward operating bases appearing around the Sotios in null security. Sort asks about raising the bounties on smaller ships, specifically to incentivize running anomalies in the less lucrative systems to combat the clustered ratting systems. Suetonia says that some escalation mechanic for the farmed clusters in null security would be cool. This would also incentivize running sites other than the sanctums and havens. The Council of Stellar Management says difficulty versus payout scale is skewed for the anomalies, as well as the escalations, in addition to giving the smaller guy a chance to make some ISK in null security without having to go to lucrative systems. Larrikin asks if this could be defined as a request to balance the null security anomalies. Newman asks whether there are any plans to make sites more dangerous. Larrikin says this was being considered but was dropped off the roadmap. There are, however, plans to add new artificial intelligence to new mechanics in the game. Innominate asks if adding the AI into the sovereignty anomalies would be something CCP wants to do. Larrikin says that he would love to do that and that this would rather be a question of time restraints rather than technical issues. Yukiko asks about aggressive NPCs, which would take space, which was a discussion at the last summit. The patrols and forward operating bases essentially were the result of this. Larrikin talks about there having been plans for NPCs to attack Cynojammers, however, nothing came out of that. End of session. Matterall, do you know what ESI is?
I don't know what ESI is. Do you guys know what ESI is in the crowd there? I believe ESI is what's a protocol to switch information back and forth from CCP to, say, a mobile client. But I don't know
Okay,
what it actually stands for. I can look it up.
I think I just found the dev blog. I'll link it to you.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
The Eve Swagger interface. ESI for short and pronounced easy. So that's what that is. Are we live or something? I thought we were just recording. Gotcha. All right. Because I was wondering who you were talking to. Does anybody in the crowd know?
Yeah, I just decided to do it in case someone wanted to be, keep us company and feed us some facts and ask questions while you were reading.
Gotcha. What's the feedback on my reading of it so far?
You only need the feedback of one, and that's me, and it's beautiful reading. It's super complete. But you guys, why don't you tell us how?
So in other
how
words, there's a hell of a lot of trolling going on in that channel now.
No. I think you guys, why don't you write some feedback? Because I think you're excellent. I don't see how anyone could see it any other way.
All right. All right, moving on to the next session. Eve Swagger interface, application program interface, and other techie stuff. Attendees: CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Chimichanga, CCP Avalon, CCP Bartender, CCP Larrikin, CCP Nagwal. CCP Guard presents this session as an opportunity to discuss tech things. Aerith asks Nick if there are any new features in the pipeline. The biggest talks have been to introduce features which affect the universe rather than the pilot. This would be things like market order creation, however, other possibilities are being explored. Innominate asks about alliance standings and ACLs. Larrikin asks for clarification on alliance standings, and that would be standings through the application program interface. CCP Bartender asks about what roles would be needed within the alliance to set standings. The main issue with ACLs would be applying them to structures. CCP Bartender does not imagine any big issue regarding that from the API. Server stress would be a concern here, however. He summarizes that there are no major issues, just a lot of investigation which would be needed. Sort mentions the 24-hour rule for supernodes and fleet fight notification. The web page needs 24-hour warning. However, technically speaking, the change could be made minutes before downtime. This causes the potential issue that supernodes are deployed for anticipated fleet fights around citadels, but that window of opportunity to request the supernode is small. Shortening this timer to 18 hours for the notification could work, but then the problem is the Citadel timer being unrelated to downtime. The issue seems to be the human element involved in this process. Nick points out that automating this process is something which has been discussed in the past. Changing the website would be a massive improvement. Addendum completed right after the summit. Sort suggested that having the system cluster moved onto a supernode when a keep star is under attack. Hooper would love to see this, and this is totally something which could be done. Larrikin wants to point out to the viewers at home that no matter how public an upcoming fight may be, a request to reinforce the node is mandatory. It was made clear that the system is fully automatic and that improvements were being considered to decrease the lead time needed. Note, right after the summit, the requirements were changed to 1 hour before the preceding downtime instead of 24 hours in advance. The meeting went into full techno babble at this point, leaving the note taker with several broken digits. A quality of life suggestion was to let naming citadels use other characters. This would need to be discussed with Team 5-0. Sort asks about low security fights and node reinforcements. Would disabling Crime Watch be possible in those cases for the sake of performance? Larrikin and Falcon reply, nope. Yukiko has a question about assets not showing up in the game. Yukiko has a question about assets not showing up in the in-game assets, but being displayed in the Eve Swagger interface. This is just caused by the item being in a junkyard, but the Eve Swagger interface not going far enough up the chain to realize that. This is being considered. Yukiko asks about Alliance bookmarks. This is a case of finding engineering time to do it. This would not be a Team Tech Co project and would need time from a development team. A question was brought up about the Intel patch and its effect on performance. No metrics have been shown to Chimichanga yet. CCP Bartender talks about the tournament tools. He has a whole bunch of big plans, but the reality is that there isn't enough time for it until perhaps after the next Alliance tournament. CCP Bartender presents the Council of Stellar Management with a question about how he plans on running the tournament this year. These plans would affect tools who use the 30-second delay on the stream for in-match intel. The CSM asks about Thunderdome. CCP Falcon says that the plan is to get it up again for the next tournament. CCP Bartender would want to see this turn into a heavily automated service to alleviate the burden on people within Crowd Control Productions. End of session. Audio and graphics. Updates on visual investigations. Attendees: CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Vertex, CCP Mambjorn, CCP Mankiller, CCP Undos, CCP Merker, CCP Bunny Virus. CCP Vertex starts saying that he wants to give an update on the art team, as the team did not have a meeting with the CSM last summit. CCP Undos shows some of the assets which have been made for characters. The team had to change the animation system which is used for the character creator, and this required the animation content pipeline to be refactored. This enables future development and updates to the system, and frees up the path towards the 64-bit client. Some assets are being made for the Capsuleer Day to celebrate 15 years of EVE Online. He also showed some exploration suit variations which had been made. The Capsuleer Day outfits were Empire themed, with an XV present in the theme as well. CCP Vertex chips in saying that since the removal of the captain's quarters, there has been a lot of cleaning house being done. This will give the potential of a 64-bit client in the future. This does not have dedicated teams, but rather a slow burn throughout the year. CCP Mankiller jokingly asks if anyone in the room noticed the captain quarters being removed. The Council of Stellar Management say no and have had very few complaints. The only disappointment was the seeming end of walking in stations. CCP Bunny Virus talks about their investigations into using heavy polygons and how that they would affect performance. They could remove the need for baked normal maps and use more polygons instead to control the shading. He shows a demonstration of the mid-poly flow before and after. CCP Vertex explains that part of the reason CCP want to do this is to speed up the creation of new ships. Currently, this takes 6 weeks for subcapitals. It is also an error-prone process. The new process would speed that up and allow the team to be more efficient. Yukiko asks if this would change anything for skins. CCP Vertex explains it would at least make them look nicer. CCP Vertex continues to say that this is an industry standard. Eve is a bit different, and the team has to take into consideration the potential performance hits. Yukiko asks how many additional polygons would be added per asset. Stephen estimates it to be doubled. CCP Vertex moves on to talk about environments with pictures of inspirational environment concept art, which gives an idea of where the team would want to take this, as well as showing some live demonstration with existing assets. He goes on to say that this exploration has given the team a good idea of where they are now, what they can improve, and what their capabilities are. A pretty video interlude. I'm guessing that means that the CSM was shown a video in the session. The team wants to show the player being enveloped in the environment, but the problem with space is it's quite vast. They are exploring with other teams what gameplay could allow this to happen. This is an ongoing investigation to see what can be changed in the background and foreground to create layers. CCP Mankiller asks if anyone is using the first-person camera. Jin says he uses it to bump freighters, but no one else says they use it. CCP Vertex shows an idea for the changed hangar environment, which the art director is working on. This is not committed, but an idea is on the table. CCP Vertex explains that they would want to renovate the hangars at some point. This would be a change they could do in the meantime. A potential hangar redesign concept was shown. Another concept was shown to give life to Stargates. A banner system would be implemented in some way with gameplay, such as Alliance logos on Sov-controlled gates or rented advertisements. CCP Vertex refers to going to America and seeing the Transportation Security Administration banners as an example of the more extreme banner amounts on gates. Jin brings up monuments on gates. CCP Vertex says it doesn't fit into this particular modular gate concept, but is something they want to do. CCP Vertex shows a change to planets, such as auroras on planets. Another concept was traffic around planets, like the station activity seen in the game today. He then shows the Badger redesigns which have been completed. He says that they are waiting on the next potential release to release the design. The Navitas redesign was also shown. The audio team shows soundscape ideas. It was described as dark and alien, but not supposed to be scary. Rather, it should lure the player in with curiosity. New acceleration gate activation audio and effects are shown. CCP Vertex explains that the team tries to do renovation throughout the year to keep the game fresh. CCP Vertex finally talks about the team working on an icon update to give more information from the module and ship icons, and how this would also open the potential for higher resolution support. A discussion was started on 4K support. This would be better addressed with Team Psycho Sisters. CCP Vertex does say that this is something the team is actively monitoring, no pun intended, and want to see it happen. They are, however, being cautious as 4K supported is, however, very difficult due to performance issues with current hardware. Jin asks about advanced audio options, and that was confirmed to not come back. It is too difficult to maintain with the updates and new audio coming into the game. Advanced camera settings. The camera sits more with Psycho Sisters than the audio and graphics. Jin asks about the issue with the heavy interdiction cruiser bubble thing. CCP Mirror confirmed it was fixed. All right, give me a minute. End of session. Give me a moment. I need to take off my headset for something. All right, settling back in again. Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right, moving on. Onboarding and new player experience. Attendees CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Affinity, CCP Dread, CCP Puncturus, CCP Red Dawn. CCP Affinity starts talking about the team recently releasing Resource Wars. She recognizes that the participation for new players is not great, and for now, they will not continue to work on it. CCP Dren says that this was something the team learned a lot from. They hoped that this would be a feature which saw the veterans taking in new players into these sites, but the rewards didn't entice the veterans. Increasing the rewards would have negative impact on new players as they would have money but no reason to play the game or an idea of what to spend the ISK on. Innominate says that new players in null security with a lot of ISK have something to use it for. CCP Affinity says that this is because those new players are already in a friend circle. The new players who are not in a corporation do not experience it the same way. CCP Dren goes back to the Resource Wars feature and explains that they are handing it over to the event team, who will be able to continue using the feature in events in the future, whilst Team Genesis shift their focus elsewhere. Removing the feature from the game is not something a team wants to do straight away, but rather use it to gain more information and tweak some numbers in the future. CCP Affinity says the team wants to explore offering players a choice when they start the game, as no one is the same when they start the game and they wish to cater to many different playstyles. She also asks for feedback from the Council of Stellar Management to know what their drive is in the game. The CSM gives some examples of what their drive is, but they also admit that they are not the most appropriate people to ask this question as they are high-level players and each fit into a different niche. Yukiko says that the freedom of choosing what to do in the game is the interesting aspect. A player can do missions one day, and the next day explore, or get involved in a fleet fight. Newman says that even though new players may only be pressing F1 when involved in a fight, but they were still part of something. Sort adds that a feeling of loss to set the emotional context of the progress the player has made in the game. Steve says that it's the roadblocks in the game which make the game for him, obtaining a ship and working towards that and setting himself a challenge. Getting a large sum of ISK in the start removes that roadblock, which defeats the purpose of the game. The industrialist aspect was mentioned. Someone will want to be the person who replaces the losses from fleet fights. Sort notes that a way to convince the non-null security players that they are important and a part of the game is an important point to keep in mind. Aerith mentions the ripple effect players have with their smaller actions. A way to show this in the game is a visual aspect. Aerith mentions the ripple effect players have with their smaller actions. A way to show this in the game in a visual aspect could motivate players. They referred to the butterfly effect trailer. One CSM member mentions that he and some friends started playing. His friends quit immediately, but he joined a corporation, got scammed, got ganked with all his assets in Jita. But he kept playing. Aerith asks about the information Crowd Control Productions has regarding where the players are coming in from and if there is any correlation to their in-game activities. CCP Dren explains that a team is indeed monitoring this data, and CCP Infinity says that this data is something Team Genesis would consider using in the future. Jin suggests a gladiator-style end to the tutorial where two new players are pitted against each other. CCP Affinity says this would work for some player styles, but Crowd Control Productions cannot force that on everyone. Sort mentions adding the events to the tutorial to give players the confirmation that they are not alone and that there is indeed something occurring in their proximity. Sutonia asks whether Crowd Control Productions would consider clustering the new players together more as they are now split between 12 different systems. CCP Affinity says that clustering together like-minded new players has potential. Sort says that he saw in Albion that many players in the same area indicates that the game is healthy. Seeing something similar in Eve may be good to explore. Another point is that the starter systems are scattered in the corners of Empire space. Jin recalls this being discussed 2 summits ago. Sutonia suggests the Concord constellation as a new place for all the rookies, a system for each race. The bloodline and background could be used to cater a tutorial better for new players. Sort mentions the older character creation, where these choices did affect the skills and attributes for new players. CCP Affinity mentions that this saw a lot of players realizing they made a quote unquote bad choice and would go and create a new character. The main concern which Aerith and Sort bring up is that new players are being placed so far away from the main hubs. Minmatar space being emptier would perhaps give a bad impression on new Minmatar players. The whole group agrees that consolidating the new players to a more compact location, perhaps placing the systems in the same region as the bigger trade hubs. End of session. Sovereignty and null security. Attendees: CCP Guard, CCP Falcon, CCP Mimic, CCP Larrikin, CCP Fozzie, CCP Lebowski, CCP Master Plan. Sort suggests Intosis giving an electronic countermeasures bonus to counter ECM bursts. However, this would cause the potential issue of repeated cycle of warp in, jam, etc. Sort points out that people would like to fight over this rather than intosising. Forcing a fight would be better, he feels. The Council of Stellar Management asks if adding upwell structure timers to infrastructure hubs would be possible. Fozzie responds that this is something the team is interested in investigating for the future and may be part of a future set of admin hub structures. Sort points out that the system jammers are becoming the biggest aspect of the current SOV, which limits big fights. Node regeneration is turning into a distraction mechanic. Sort asks if there is anything being done about indices. Fozzie says that this is not something they are looking at right now. It is, however, something to do in the future. Aerith asks about observatories and if they are off the table with the current plans. Fozzie says that they are years away, but not being dropped. Fozzie talks about small day-tripping structures to replace the function of small towers in wormholes, among other things. This could potentially be a 2018 release. Outposts being changed to faction citadels is still happening, was delayed slightly due to Upwell 2.0, but is still going to happen. Sort asks about the fuel bonus from territorial claim units being added to citadels. Fozzie says that this is not currently planned. Sort asks about infrastructure hub wormhole upgrades. Fozzie says he doesn't expect updating them anytime soon. Sort asks about moon blocking with dedicated structures. Fozzie says this is interesting, but not something which is being looked at now. Sort then asks about ice mining upgrades. Fozzie says this is not something being looked at now and explains it was intended to be a separate distribution mechanic to ore. Fozzie says that asset safety value is calculated incredibly conservatively right now, but this will be adjusted with the Upwell firmware update. In the new update, very few things will have zero value. Aerith asks about a size pass for modules, minerals, and other items, much like Crowd Control Productions did with Moongoo. Fozzie says this is something they'd approach with caution and perhaps look at other items first. Sort asks if it is possible to look at compressing moon minerals. Fozzie says that their current low volume is intended to replace compression of their ores in a way that encourages players to use their local refining services. Lebowski says that the outpost to faction citadel conversion will be an interesting strain test on the asset safety system, with the amount of assets needing to be accounted for in some cases. Sort asks if Crowd Control Productions have considered the monument status of the big conquerables. Fozzie says this is currently being worked on. The Interstellar Services Department are writing up the history of the conquerable stations, and there are a lot of cool things planned for these monuments, such as a station wreck with the last alliance which owned it having their logo forever emblazoned on it. Innominate recalls a fun bug with the CCP TAC US station. Sort asks about the spawning mechanics of node spawning and the current faults. Fozzie asks if they would like to see the spawning time being adjusted. Sort and Aerith would simply prefer fewer nodes. Sort gives a time frame example for an attacker with no one coming to defend until a few days into the capturing, where only a few pilots remain for the attacker when the defenders come in with a massive fleet to negate the initial attack. Sort makes the point that something needs to be changed, as no matter whether the players are attacking or defending, they would rather want the fight sooner rather than later and get it over. Steve brings up nullification and the aspects of the issue the Council of Stellar Management and Crowd Control Productions disagree on with this mechanic. Steve suggests a module that could be deployed in a system to disable the nullification capabilities of ships. Larrikin says the amount of exceptions here and complexity would be difficult to communicate. Sort brings up the potency of ECM bursts on nullifier immune interceptors, and how he feels they are impossible to counter in any capacity. Changing the fitting requirements for ECM bursts would go a long way. Fozzie nods in thinking agreement. End of session. All right, it's getting late enough that I need to stop for now. We can send me a Twitter direct message for when you want to continue. For the record, the next session we need to cover is the structures
Structures.
session on page 30. And I will save this as a browser bookmark.
It looks like we got about halfway done in what, a little over an hour? So that's good. I mean, I think we can take this early next week, maybe Monday.
Yeah, Monday sounds good.
All right. Well, good job. It's been great reading.
Thank you all.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. I'm going to shut off the stream now. We'll be back Monday. This is again being recorded for an edited version, which we'll put out on Talking in Stations, some kind of special edition with Seamus.